Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Legacy Cafe podcast with your host, Robb Lucy. Robb is the author of the book, How Will You Be Remembered? A Guide for Creating and Enjoying Your Legacies Now. So grab yourself a cup of coffee and find yourself a seat in the Legacy Cafe. Here's Robb.
Thanks, Kathy. I am Robb Lucy, and welcome to the Legacy Cafe. You know, when I started on this journey of learning about what legacies are and aren't, I was under that misapprehension that legacies were about money and death. You know, you shuffle all the money and the resources down to the kids. Well, the problem was for me and my wife, we didn't have kids. We're not wealthy. We're not famous, and I don't think I'm dead yet. But along this journey, the first thing I came across was the concept of putting me on paper, and that becoming a legacy for descendants that follow. I'm going to introduce you to a guy who is the guru of this craft, and his name is Dr. Barry Baines. He's a hospital medical director in the Twin Cities, and he's got a book out called Ethical Wills, Putting Your Values on Paper, and it charged me into this. So, Barry, hello. You're out in the Twin Cities. Hello.
Yes, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Rob, good to hear your voice. And
I really mean it. You are the guru of this. I mean, your book, which I've got in my hand, got me into this. So, first of all, what is an ethical will? How would you define that?
Yeah, very simply stated, an ethical will is a way to record and share, that's very important, your values, beliefs, life lessons, faith, gratitude, love, and forgiveness with family, friends, and community. That's it in a nutshell of what an ethical will is. It's also known as some other terms attached to it that explain it. It's also called a legacy letter, also known as a love letter from the heart, voice of the heart, or a legacy of values. Those are other things that tend to be used pretty interchangeably.
Yeah, I call mine a legacy letter, and as I teach a course on building your legacy stories, I call it a legacy letter, and a lot of people put the ethical will into a video format, which has been really fun to help people along. What got you into it, though? I'm sure you run across quite a few dramatic events being a medical director, but how did this start?
Yeah, and this came directly from my work in hospice, and it was the story that really got me launched in this whole area. So we'll have to turn the clock back to 1997, and we were sitting in our hospice team meeting. For those listeners who may not be aware of how hospice teams work, usually there's a medical director, the nurse case manager, social workers, chaplains, volunteer people, therapists, pet therapists, etc. And we were going over our caseload, and the chaplain told us about one of our patients, a man named Dennis, who was in his late 40s. Sadly, he had pancreatic cancer, which is it's a cancer with a very poor prognosis. And this gentleman told Phil that he just had this sense of foreboding and hopelessness centering around that he was going to die and there'd be no trace that he was ever on the earth. And as Phil shared this with the team, that sense of hopelessness really sort of settled in on all of us, figuring out what could we do for this guy, because here was a man, he was married, he had 2 young kids. I think, as you prefaced earlier, you know, Dennis was not rich and famous, let's put it that way. He sort of went through the school of hard knocks in his life, and here he was on the cusp of getting to his end and feeling that first wave will wash up on the shore and his footprint would be gone. And it was at that point that literally it was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I recalled reading a book 10 years earlier called So That Your Values Live On, Ethical Wills and How to Prepare Them. That was written by Jack Reamer and Nathaniel Stamfer. And I remembered reading about this idea of values that you could pass on. So sort of the way we think of a will of inheritance as a way to pass on your valuables, think of the ethical will or legacy letter as a way to pass on your values. So I mentioned this to the team. Everybody was sort of looking to grasp at some straws that might help this young man. And so after our team meeting, I sat down with Phil and recalled what I could from this book I read 10 years before that about questions that he could ask Dennis. And so, not surprisingly, when Phil went out later that week to visit with Dennis and presented this idea to him, Dennis grabbed onto this the way a drowning person would grab onto a life preserver. It took Phil about an hour and a half to go through through about half a dozen questions. He was the scribe for Dennis. And as soon as he was done, Dennis turned to Phil and said, Phil, that horrible suffering that I was experiencing, that, basically I'd be forgotten, it's totally gone. And when Phil came back to our team meeting afterwards, we were all blown away. I mean, the idea that something as simple as this recording of values and life lessons, hopes for the future. In the case for Dennis, he knew it was a future that he wasn't going to be a part of in a physical sense, but felt that he was leaving his mark for his kids as they grew up. And that, as you can imagine, just got me launched on this idea of ethical wills and legacy letters. And although I started in the hospice arena, the end-of-life care area, it pretty soon afterwards, within a couple of years, really started to move upstream. So that's sort of the short story that got me on this journey, as it were, and it's been something that there's not a day that goes by where I'm not more and more impressed with how impactful this could be, and that it's within grasp of everybody. It's not something that's just too complicated to do. Everybody has had an extraordinary life, and capturing those things that are important is not out of anybody's reach.
Yeah, before I ask you what can be in an ethical will legacy letter, you're not a psychologist, I know, but what happened to Dennis then? What happened in his brain and his heart for him to be at peace then?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rob. And one of the things that I've understood is that humans have this transcendent dimension, and to sort of put that into English, or to make it more simply understood, transcendence is the idea that life will continue after we're gone. And humans are believed to be the only species that have that dimension. Mm-hmm. Put it in another way, it's that there's a drive within us that we want to be remembered. We don't want to be forgotten. And now in Dennis's case, he had this tangible connection to future generations in his case. It was written down, and it was there. Even if he wasn't going to be there, people could refer to it. They would remember him. This is what he stood for. This is what he hoped for. And that gave him this peace of mind, or this tranquility. And I know from other discussions that you and I have had over the years, this sense of peace of mind that washes over you when you're done with this. I know when I wrote my ethical will, when I was done, I just felt really good. I had this peace of mind that I had, again, created something that's going to be a tangible connection.
Boy, you and I have had that very same experience, and we haven't talked about it. When I wrote mine, I finally did it. I started mine with 6 values, why they were important to me, and here's a story of me living that value. Once I got that written, and it took a little bit of time to write, and it wasn't, this is 2 pages maybe. Mm-hmm. I felt absolutely relieved, totally, when I folded it up and put it in my drawer and told my wife it's here. Mm-hmm. I just felt like now I don't want to. I don't want to be hit by that herd of water buffalo, but
right. Mm-hmm.
I felt at peace because now my family will know more about me, and if they keep this letter, so will our descendants. What can be in an ethical will for a legacy letter?
Yeah, I mean, typically, again, people think of it as your legacy of values. So certainly sitting down and recording values that are important to you, and also doing a little bit of unpacking. It's not so much writing a bullet list of things, because people want to know more. It's not only what the value is, but why is that value important? So people will write about things, commonly about the value of hard work, the value of family. They'll write about gratitude for others. They'll write about relationships, the importance of family. They'll write about their faith. But again, it's not just writing the words on the paper of what the value is or what the life lesson is, but a little bit of the why behind it. What's the drive for that? And that typically is, and that's why, in fact, my ethical will is about 1.5 pages. So, they're really not that long. It doesn't mean you can't write more. There's not like a magic, number of pages that a legacy letter can be.
I did my first legacy letter, ethical will, by portraying these, I guess, 6 values I had. Mm-hmm. With why is it important in a story. And the stories were good. I had some fun telling them. But then I've gone back into this letter. It's in print. and I've added more things like experiences I've had and learned from, people I've learned from, people I love, apologies I want to make. I've started throwing them in there too, and I feel better every time I close the envelope.
Yes, I think all of those things are perfect to really be putting in a legacy letter. I think that's great. And interestingly, after I got done with mine, I was so excited that I ran up to find my two pre-teenage daughters to share mine with them. I was very excited, and they were kind of, looking at this, and they're looking and says, "Oh yeah, Dad, that's nice." And then they point. They said, "You could do better on this one over here." One of my daughters worked in the same workplace as me, and she took me aside one day and said, Dad, I've been watching you at work. And I said, "Oh, what's that about?" And she said, "Well, no, that ethical will that you shared with us, well, I can really see that you're trying to, to sort of walk the talk. The things that you said are important. I'm kind of seeing you do that in your life. So it's this idea of living your life with more intention. When you write your legacy letter earlier in your life, you have some time, and this piece about intentionality as well as leaving a legacy becomes, I don't want to say as important because it meets different needs, but it is also that intentionality is very important."
So what I take from that is then, I was going to ask about what's the earliest to write one, but at almost any age is fine as long as you have the will and the desire to do it. And secondly, I was going to ask about sharing. You shared yours with your family then, so they know what your thoughts are.
Yep. Yes, they do. I've quote gone public.
Yeah.
And when you do, I think that's one of the things that helps you to live your life with greater intention, because you've gone on record publicly of saying things that are important to you, things that you hope to do. But I also put in mind that, that we are human, we have failings, we make mistakes, and so, hopefully I'll be forgiven for some of the mistakes that I make throughout my life.
I came to the legacy letter, and it just made sense to me that it was a legacy, in that my definition in the book, as you know, is that the legacy will connect you to others, it'll enhance all your lives, you'll be happier, and you can know that when you breathe your last smile, you're leaving something pretty good behind. So I think the ethical will legacy letter is a perfect legacy. I got a feeling you might agree, but what are your thoughts?
I agree, and like I say, the postscript on that is live your life as you wish to be remembered, as well, and that will just sort of reaffirm what's in your legacy and how you be remembered.
Why write one early? Why write one at 35 versus waiting till you're 75, 80?
Yeah, I like to think that people are going to write this or be inclined to do this at transitions in their lives and turning points. And we go through those at many different stages. And so starting a little bit more upstream gives one the ability to add to over time. And actually, you talked about that yourself with yours. My sense is that while there is an importance in having some life experience under your belt, the tone and the focus of a legacy letter will probably change the more experience you have. And just one real quick example, there's a University of Hartford, a college in Connecticut, that actually is part of an adult journey class. The instructor has all of the students write an ethical will or legacy letter. So these are kids 18, 19, 20 years old, and they've shared some of those with me because they use some of our resources to do this. And the ethical wills that they write, their legacy letters, have much more about gratitude for their parents, what their parents and grandparents gave them in terms of a foundation for making decisions, for doing the right thing in life, for wanting to make a difference. So there's a lot of gratitude, and they talk about their hopes for the future, and again, that what they've been given, that they hope to just pay forward, and they're very heartwarming in and of itself. One of the things I find, and Rob, you've read a whole bunch of them as well, I find every ethical will legacy letter that I read has a certain elegance to it, and in part, it's not fancy language necessarily, but it so much speaks of the voice of the heart that comes out there that you can't help but get taken in as you read these.
What would you suggest to somebody to have a taste of what can be?
Yeah, I could think of three things just real quick off the top of my head. For those of your listeners out there who keep diaries and journals, that's, more of the blank sheet of paper approach, as I call it. And for people who do that, if you just review what you've written over the past several months, there are themes that would tend to come out, and that would be a great way to sort of condense and summarize just moving forward just like that. But those are, again, the people that really are comfortable with the blank sheet of paper approach. For other people, I like to do two very quick exercises, which obviously we're not going to have time to moderate around, but one of them is sit down, a piece of paper, take a minute, and just jot down three values or three phrases that describe who you are as a person. And that becomes very rich in terms of unpacking those. So, in my case, I typically write down creativity, compassion, and humor. The compassion comes from my hospice work. I try to be humorous. I succeed sometimes and sometimes not. And my creativity is known. Give me a problem. I like to think outside the box with that. Another good one is sort of just connecting yourself to ancestors, someone in your family that you feel connected to, who may be gone. They could certainly be still living. But the idea of putting yourself in the position of being able to talk to them about their lives and their lifetimes, jotting down, again, a half a dozen questions of what you'd want to know about their lives and their lifetimes. And then if you just turn that around, like 180 degrees, sort of paying it forward, there's a version of those questions that you would want to ask this ancestor of yours that your ancestors would want to ask of you. And that is very fertile ground for just spinning off, again, values, life lessons, stories, etc. And then I also, it's not, being copycatting or anything, but seeing examples, reading examples of legacy letters, I think really helps a person to understand what they are. And so a bit of your writing and looking at some examples of ethical wills that people write is a great way to get going on this.
Barry, there's one chapter in my book where we deal about time. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people say, well, I'll get to my values later. And I'm saying sometimes those people don't get there and they have to wait for their eulogist to tell them what their legacies are.
Yeah.
Why not wait till you've got a little bit more wisdom and more experience to talk about?
Yeah. Two reasons why. Number one, the reality that no one is promised tomorrow. So you may wait and it'll be too late. And once these things are gone, they're gone forever. The other thing, if you look at a legacy letter as being more of a process rather than an event that you just, I did my legacy letter, now I'm done, it's not so much a summary as sort of an ongoing process. So if you start putting pen to paper or recording, there's a lot of different formats for doing this. There's not one way that's necessarily the best, although I like writing only because that seems to be the most enduring, and technology changes and you can get caught up in those kind of things. But the idea that if you start reflecting, and again, people tend to be motivated to do this at transitions and turning points, challenging events, milestones in their life, sometimes like a lot of national or natural disasters compel people to do that because, just the fragility of life. But the idea, if you start early, even though your focus may be something a little bit different as you're looking toward the future, it still ensures that you have something written down to work on as you continue to grow. And actually, to me, I think it would be even more fun in the sense that off into the future to see how people have changed and grown over the years.
And it'll change because I've had that experience myself when I did my first legacy letter was, as I say, 6 values. Mm-hmm. I had shot up the importance of health because I had some health issues, and thankfully we've got rid of them, and so health has moved down to number 4. Always stay healthy and keep in great shape. But it evolves. Both my values evolve, and also other content has evolved too. And because you and I are both very young guys, these our legacy letters may change 100 times before we're done.
I'm hoping.
I think once people start their legacy letter with a 45-word paragraph, the seed is now there. It's been germinated, and you will have so much joy in evolving your legacy letter.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, you'll say, "Boy, that feels." You will say that. You'll say that feels good all the way along the journey.
Absolutely.
Barry, this has been great information, but we have more. For those of you listening, we have built a special web page that will allow you to learn a lot more about ethical wills and legacy letters. And that web page is this: legacycafe.org/Baines, Baines. That's legacycafe.org/Baines, Baines. We'll have links there to Barry's blog, to his website. We'll let you know how you can get the book. And you'll be able to connect with Dr. Baines, and you may have some questions about your own ethical will or legacy letter. And you've got workbooks and things that can help people out.
Yep.
So head to legacycafe.org/Baines, Baines, for some great information on something which I really believe in. Thank you very much for this time with us. I think we may have moved a few people forward.
Great, I hope so. And Rob, it was a pleasure to chat with you today.
I'm Robb Lucy. This is the Legacy Cafe. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Legacy Cafe podcast. We have lots of great conversations coming your way. And by the way, if you want us to send you reminders that a new podcast is ready for you, go to legacycafe.org to subscribe. That's legacycafe.org. Have a great day, and remember, the coffee and conversations are always hot at the Legacy Cafe.